Welcome to theAnalysis-news. I'm Greg Wilpert. It looks like the so-called second pink tide in Latin America is continuing. On December 20th, Chileans elected a leftist and former student leader, Gabriel Boric, as its president. Boric, at 35 years of age, will be the country's youngest and possibly most leftist president since Salvador Allende's election 51 years ago in 1970. Boric won the election with 56% of the vote, about 12 percentage points ahead of José Antonio Kast, a candidate of the far right, whose brother was an advisor to former dictator Augusto Pinochet. What does Boric's victory mean for Chile and for the region? Joining me to look at those and other questions is Patricio Zamorano. He is a Chilean political analyst and the director of the Council on Hemispheric Affairs, COHA.org, which is based in Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining me today, Patricio.
It is a real pleasure, Greg. Thank you.
Let's start with the campaign and the election result. Following the first round of the election on November 21st, right-wing candidate José Antonio Kast was slightly ahead with 28% of the vote compared to Boric's 26%. Now, the race for the second round looked very tight, but then Boric won with a very solid 12 percentage point advantage. What happened?
Sure. There are a couple of things that actually happened there. First of all, we have in Chile still a very hardcore right-wing vote. We have always 25 to 30% of the vote, and there's no doubt that there are still people who like the legacy of Augusto Pinochet. We have that. That said, all polls were absolutely wrong, except a couple of them. But myself also, I believed in those polls because in Chile, polls in general tend to be okay technically, but in this case, they made a huge mistake, and the post-analysis of the situation demonstrates that basically 500,000 new voters came to the polls, most of them young people that were mobilized after the victory of Kast in first round. So that's why we had this huge difference, because just before the election, the polls were tied, basically. It was a technical tie, 50-50. The outcome of the election was not clear at all. So it was a surprise for me. It was a surprise for the whole country, the huge difference of almost 12 points between both candidates. So that's a little bit of the explanation, and we will find out more as the weeks pass, right?
Now, before we get to Boric and his platform and what he plans to do, let's take a quick look at Kast, the man he defeated. Now, who is Kast, and what did he stand for, and who did he represent?
Sure. Well, Kast is a congressman who represents Pinochetism, basically. It's all the legacy of Augusto Pinochet, even amplified by the fact that he's absolutely out of touch with the reality of the world. We have certain values now that little by little are becoming standard for societies. We believe in social protection. We believe in the rights of women. We believe in the rights of the LGBTQ plus community. We believe in certain things that are becoming standard in theory, on paper, but Kast actually ran on a platform that was against these values. He was extremely conservative, representing the right, the far right, almost fascism in a certain way, because he declared even that he was going to use secret jails. Basically, he was saying that we will detain people in special jails to fight crime, making us remember all the secret police under Augusto Pinochet. Basically, he was not shy of new policies against immigrants. His economic platform was extremely conservative. He was actually against this new wave of reform that 80% of Chileans want. For example, a new constitution. We have to remember that almost 80% of the population in a referendum declared that they wanted to have a new constitution to be written to replace the Pinochet constitution, and Kast was against that as well. He was against the reform in the pension system, so against benefits from the state, from the government in general. So Kast was really against this current of new progressive advancements. The Chilean people decided that they didn't want to try that again. We have to remember that we had a neoliberal system in Chile. All the fundamentals aspects of society were privatized under the dictatorship. The pension system was privatized, the health system was privatized, the education system was privatized. So Kast was really trying to enforce that model that fell, that nobody likes, and a model that has caused a lot of damage to Chileans in the last 40 years.
Now I'm wondering what happened in the sense of the media mostly presented this as a contest between the far left and the far right. Now, leaving aside the question about just how far left Boric is, it definitely seems to have been an election where the center left and the center right has completely vanished from the scene, it seems. Now, if you think about Piñera, I guess he was a right-wing candidate, but Kast was to the right. I mean, he was a right-wing president, Piñera, but Kast was to the right of him, and Boric is certainly to the left of the previous center-left presidents. So what happened to the center-left and to the center-right, which had been governing Chile since the defeat of Augusto Pinochet?
Sure. I believe that the answer is very clear. I'm part of that generation also in the 90s, where the center left and the center right basically negotiated with the Pinochet legacy, and they compromised. And they created or accepted the most fundamental aspects of this neoliberal and authoritarian model, and they continue basically managing the same institutional and economic framework that was delivered by the Constitution of 1980. So in that process, they sold their soul basically to the legacy of Augusto Pinochet, and a lot of people like me, we didn't like that. We believed that the dictatorship had to be wiped out from Chilean democracy. We believed that the system was extremely unequal. It was not inclusive. It was very conservative in bad terms, and it created just a lot of damage to the social framework of the country. We have to remember that Chile is top 10 among the most unequal countries in the whole world, where rich people are extremely rich and poor people are very poor. And that was the model that the center-right and the center-left agreed to preserve. So that's why Boric, when he emerges from a whole history of mobilization, because he himself was a student leader his whole life. So it's not coincidence that he's actually leading the way, because those students from high schools, from middle schools in Chile, from universities, they were against this model way before all this new wave of social unrest. So that's why Boric actually is very critical of the center left. He's very critical of the Socialist Party, which in theory is the party of Salvador Allende, but the Socialist Party is not the same party, is more a social democrat party now. Very critical of the Christian Democrats as well. All those parties that negotiated with the legacy of Augusto Pinochet. So, and the society, the Chilean society, was very clear, I think, in saying that we want to break from that system, because that system of the center is just not working for us. So the buying power of Chileans based on salaries is extremely low. Chileans are really suffering social depression in so many aspects. When you have a system where the health system, the education, and the pensions are privatized, meaning that means that you get good benefits or good quality of life based on your incomes. And we have to remember more than 50% of Chileans make less than $500 a month. And almost 70% makes less than $700 a month. So it's extremely unequal. The situation of families is very tight. So, of course, I think it's very obvious what happened in the last 2 years based on that trauma. It's a social trauma that Chileans have suffered in the last 40 years after the dictatorship in terms of economic terms and social terms.
Well, let's turn to more specifically what we might be able to expect from Gabriel Boric. I mean, you already talked about his background, but I mean, how would he be different from, let's say, the 2 terms of Michelle Bachelet, who was a center-left president, and who did not do much to change Chile's economic or political system? What ways do you think Boric will be different?
It's going to be different because of the context, because now Boric is going to be the manager, institutional manager of a new constitution. We have to remember that we have a constitutional assembly working. We have 155 deputies elected by the people working, writing a new constitution. And the basis of that constitution matches exactly the government program, the governance program of Boric. So we are talking about eliminating the rules of the market throughout all these social aspects of any society: education, health, pensions, also labor rights, women's rights, indigenous rights, all these elements that are modern now that everybody agrees with. That's going to be part of the new constitution. So Boric has a huge responsibility here. It's not easy because he only has 4 years. We have to remember that, unfortunately, the Chilean law gives a new president only 4 years. He or she can be re-elected after another term, so it's non-consecutive. So that's exactly what happened with Bachelet and Piñera. And the huge difference is this time, Boric is resting on a platform of change, real change. Michelle Bachelet was more like a progressive candidate. It did a very good job in certain aspects, but she never really delivered reforming the private health system or the educational system. We had some progress, but it was very minor. So now Boric is really the progressive candidate who has a huge responsibility that in 4 years he needs to deliver a huge amount of a new contract, basically, between the Chilean state and Chileans. And that's a huge challenge. There is no doubt about that.
Is there a timeline set for the new constitution? I mean, when it might be approved?
Sure. It was formed between June and July. The new assembly has 9 months minimum to work. That's going to be April. But it could actually expand it up to 12 months. So we may have a new constitution by May or June 2022. After that, we're going to organize a new referendum, and Chileans will decide in a democratic elections if they accept or not the new constitution. The good thing, though, is that the fact that Boric will be the one who is going to sign this new constitution, which is very great. Yeah.
And it also seems important to note that the majority of the representatives to the Constitutional Convention are of progressive groupings. Isn't that correct?
Yes, they got more than 70% of the seats. That was another victory of the expectations of the people. That's why these polls were very misleading, because we couldn't believe, we means analysts, we couldn't believe how is that possible if 80% of the population agree with a new constitution, and then the deputies elected more than 70%, which is the absolutely majority for a lot of very deep changes. Basically, it's the super majority that the center-left got there, so they're not going to have the right-wing parties boycotting this progress. How is that possible? How it was possible that the elections of the presidents were just tied 50-50? So that's why it was great to see that the actual reality of things, that most of the people, 12 points of difference, people want change. So in that case, yeah, Boric will have that advantage, at least some peace of mind. Although I have to clarify, though, Greg, it's very important for people who are watching us that they understand that Boric got a lot, but still his sector and the center-left doesn't have enough votes in Congress. In Congress, in both the Senate and the Lower House, in both cameras, Boric doesn't have more than 50%. That means that he must negotiate with the right-wing parties, and that's going to be an extra challenge in terms of the legislation, right? And that's a challenge that we should be very clear about, because that's gonna compromise a little bit the rhythm of reforms that Boric is gonna try to make.
That's actually what I was going to get into next, is just how likely it is that Boric will be able to carry out his program, because I mean he clearly has a mandate with such an overwhelming majority, and also given the Constitutional Convention the way it's composed. But then, like you said, the legislature is he doesn't have control over that. But then there's also another factor that I want to bring up, which is of course the legacy and the remaining power of the right in Chile, and more in general in its institutions and in society. I mean, after all, Pinochet created a system that was supposed to be protect basically the right-wing kind of model that he had set up, and I'm just wondering how likely it is that or what possibilities will Boric have to overcome those aspects? That is, I mean, if you look at, for example, other countries where there had been efforts to introduce very progressive change, particularly, there was the coup in Honduras, and then there was a coup in Bolivia, and then legislative coup in Brazil. I mean, will Boric face similar obstacles as, let's say, in Brazil? Or Paraguay was also a legislative coup against Fernando Lugo back in 2012. So, do you think that he'll be able to overcome this kind of opposition? What do you think?
Yeah, we don't have those conditions in Chile. I think the context is very clear. He has a very strong mandate. There's absolutely no doubt that's why Kast considered the victory of Boric just very early, 5 p.m., 5:30 p.m. Washington time, 7 p.m. In Chile, just 1 hour after all the polls were closed, just with 10% of the votes counted. The difference was so huge that Kast immediately accepted his failure to become the new president of Chile. I'm saying that because from that point on, it's very clear that Boric has a strong mandate. Even though he doesn't control Congress, at least the new constitution will create a new framework. So even though he doesn't have more than 50% of both cameras, at least the new constitution will impose a new contract. So it's going to be a contract of where the rules of the market are not going to be applied to health, to education, and to pensions, and to labor rights, etc., etc. So that's a good start. But there is absolutely no doubt that the right-wing parties are going to do whatever they can to hold any level of power, because they lost the referendum, they lost the deputy elections of those people who are going to write the new constitution, they lost the presidency, and now they don't want to lose power in Congress. So they are going to do whatever they can to stop Boric. There's no doubt about that. We have to remember that those parties are still strong. That sector controls big sectors of the economy of Chile, the financial system, the media. We have a huge concentration of right-wing media outlets in Chile. There is a very difficult way to express different views. So there's no doubt, Greg, that these political parties are going to fight back as much as they can, because they are on the defensive now. They cannot believe what happened, especially with the symbolic fact and real fact that the Communist Party, for example, is part of the coalition. It's part of the coalition of Boric. So 40 years later, after Pinochet tried to exterminate human beings, militants of the Communist Party, now the Communist Party comes back to power through democratic means, being elected, being part of a government, a new government, or offering a new way of governance. And that's a huge thing also that I want to mention, yeah.
But that also raises the question of what's the role of the military. I mean, after all, Pinochet was a general. Do you think the military will have any role to play in a negative sense?
We'll see. I mean, so far, the military, since the last decades, have been very quiet. They really have, the new generals, the new generation, you can feel that they don't like the cost for the armed forces of Chile, the moral cost that was imposed by the legacy of Augusto Pinochet. They don't like that. But at the same time, we still have a body of people who are very conservative. And that's why it's very important, all this process, because the Pinochet dictatorship imposed through the Constitution a role for the armed forces. The armed forces on paper were the ones who were authorized to intervene the democratic system if they believed that the security of the country was being affected. And in a language that meant everything from being govern the country from being governed by the communists or any identification. They have the right to identify terrorism on any group of Chile. It's exactly what's going on now with the indigenous Mapuche people from Chile who are being called terrorists based on the 1980 constitution, and then the armed forces and the police exercises huge repression against them. So those things need to change at some point. All this movement, all this progress is actually made in a way that the armed forces shouldn't intervene anymore. I think there's no political conditions for that now. The police actually is the opposite. The police of Chile, Carabineros, that's the actual name of our police forces, they need to be reformed. They're highly repressive. They harm a lot of people during the last 2 years, because we have to remember this came before COVID. The social unrest and this movement of progress for a new constitution, it's been around for at least 4 years. So in that process, Piñera actually used the police against the people, and we have people without eyes. They lost eyes because of rubber bullets. Police again use dogs. There is accusations of rape. So the police has a very low legitimacy right now. So and the military knows that. So I don't see conditions for an intervention, but of course we know that Pinochet had still a big level of influence. Still, Kast got 30%, almost 30% of the vote in first round. So we really need to pay attention so we don't make the same mistakes from the past and the Chilean democracy survives.
Now, finally, I want to turn to the international context. Boric has been welcomed by many center-left leaders in the region, such as by Lula da Silva in Brazil, Gustavo Petro in Colombia, and then the President Andrés Manuel López Obrador in Mexico, Fernandez in Argentina. But leaders of Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela have been much more reluctant to praise his victory because Boric has at times criticized these governments. What do you think this will mean for the left in Latin America, that is, left governments, because the majority of them are now governed by left or center-left presidents?
Sure. That's why I don't agree necessarily of the pink tide theory regarding Boric and others, because it's not really there. It's not Boric doesn't belong to the Bolivarian region or to the Bolivarian movement. Even though the Communist Party will be part of the coalition, in that sense, the Communist Party will be the one maybe putting pressure on Boric to have a constructive view of what did you mention, Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, Bolivia even. Honduras also, I think I would include Honduras and Xiomara Castro into that Bolivarian spirit. The rest of the governments are more on the social democrat range of political spectrum, and in that sense Boric will be more comfortable with those governments, with Argentina maybe, with Mexico, and others. So Pedro Castillo also in Peru is not 100% clear how Bolivarian he is, because he's getting a lot of pressure from the conservative sectors of Peru. Very similar. So in that sense, we have to be very clear that Boric, in that sense, in terms of social values and economic aspects, is very progressive. Is to the left of the left. in terms of foreign policy, I would say he will be very center. We shouldn't be surprised if he even says something against the Nicolas Maduro president's government in Venezuela, or even Cuba, or even Nicaragua. So we have that contradiction there. So, but it's very important to be very pragmatic about that, because Boric, it is a pragmatic president in that sense. He named, for example, Salvador Allende in some of the debates, the discussions on TV against Kast, but he also named Frey, which is a Christian Democrat, as one of his favorite presidents. So that shows you a little bit that Boric is still, in certain way, is going to try to invite more Chileans to his project. And I think it's very smart, because we have to remember that 80% of the population who accepted a new constitution, some of them are conservative. So we have conservative Chileans who also understand that the country goes first, and they are willing to rewrite a constitution that they perceive that is not working. So Boric, as a president, he needs to respond to certain sectors that are not necessarily represented by the center-left. So in that sense, in terms of foreign policy, I could anticipate, I could speculate that Boric will be on the center a little bit, yeah.
No, I think that's interesting, especially because, with regard to relations between Chile and the United States. Now, I mean, one of the two strategies that governments in Latin America have been choosing between have either been greater regional integration during the first so-called pink tide, when UNASUR was created, the Union of South American countries, and then also CELAC, and these were created during the height of particularly under the leadership, I would say, of Hugo Chavez. But since then, those institutions have kind of fallen apart, and then various countries, especially the right-wing countries, have tried to ally themselves again with the United States. So that seems to be kind of the tendency, either to unite or to ally with the United States. Now, if that's the choice, where do you think, what policy or what direction do you think Boric will choose with regard to U.S.-Chile relations?
I am under the impression that he's going to diversify. Even Piñera has been extremely pragmatic. Piñera government had very good relationship with China, with Europe in general. I can anticipate that Boric will be part of that wave of connections. Latin America is not only Boric, it's not only Chile. I think Latin America in general has diversified its connection with the global market. There is no doubt about that. The U.S. is not what the U.S. used to be. It's not. Now loans are coming from China for new projects of development. China is helping with the transfer of technology. Russia is actually getting very good connections through several countries of Latin America. Europe in general has a very strong financial network with Latin America. We have now a new wave with of integration south to south, basically Latin America with Africa, South Asia. So we really have a new world that is being built for the last 20 years. So Boric, I think, will be pragmatic on that. I think he's going to continue with whatever help his agenda, whatever helps. If it's going to be China, it's going to be China. If it's going to be the US, the US. If it's going to be Europe, it's going to be Europe. So I think in that sense he will be part of that. And CELAC, I think CELAC is getting stronger. I think little by little the OAS is losing a lot of power these days. We have to remember Luis Almagro, the Secretary General of the OAS, the Organization of American States, has been highly criticized by several governments, by several presidents. He's very polemic in his way of basically supporting just unilaterally the U.S. policies, which is actually against the spirit of the OAS. The OAS should be a forum for discussion, for debate, for conversation, for protection of democracy in any country. Luis Almagro has played a very poor role in terms of those values. So I would say that maybe Boric will be more supportive of the CELAC as well than the OAS in the short term. But we will see how that international arena is going to work in the next months. I believe it's not going to be a priority for Boric. Boric has a huge domestic challenge. Huge. I'm not sure if it's feasible to do it in 4 years. So I can anticipate that Boric is not going to pay a lot of attention to the international arena, at least during the first year. The country needs help urgently. We need to reform very fundamental aspect of the Chilean society in such a short period of time. So that's going to be his priority internally.
Okay. Well, it's definitely going to be very interesting. I'm definitely going to follow up with you once we see how the Constitution shapes up. But we're going to leave it there for now. I was speaking to Patricio Zamorano, Chilean political analyst and director of the Council of Hemispheric Affairs in Washington, D.C. Thanks again, Patricio, for having joined me today.
Thank you, Greg, for the invitation.
And thank you to our listeners and viewers for tuning in to theAnalysis.news. If you like our videos and podcasts, please make sure you visit the theAnalysis.news website and make a donation there so we can continue to provide the service. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to our podcast.